Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 134. And it's this time of the year, it's this time of the Magic life cycle. We're diving into the early data of the new set, Duskmourn. Before we go into that, I'd like to thank, of course, mtgazon.com and my patrons. And I have been neglecting my patrons for a long, long time because I had guests every single time in the last 2 months. So I have some new patrons to announce. So bear with me here, but we do have Matthew, Peter, Dylan, Meltymoth, Joel, Zach, Aaron, Richard, Matthias, Sam, Drew, and Jackson. And glad to announce that some of those patrons are at the highest tier, because since recently that highest tier gives you also 1 hour of coaching with me as a part of the Patreon benefits. So if you're thinking about coaching, probably that's the good way of doing that. You subscribe to my Patreon at the highest tier, you have 1 hour a month, and that's usually enough for coaching, or at least that's enough balancing the budget and the willingness to be coached. Okay, with that out of the way, thank you very much, all of you, and of course all the patrons that's been there for months and months and months, if not years. With that, we can move to my preamble. And the preamble is very simple. Use the data wisely, but also be able not to use the data wisely. These sound different, but they are very much the same thing. One is that not using the data at all is hampering your win rate, I'm pretty sure. It's nice, especially in the early format, to look through the data and see which cards universally do well with players, and especially at the ones that you find a bit surprising, or maybe you didn't anticipate are going to be good before this format started. It's good to look at those cards that do well for everyone, because if they do well for everyone, they probably will do for you. But also, what I noticed is there is a certain amount of fetishization of the data, where people just blindly follow the game in hand win rate and try to draft through that. And that's not very productive, because first of all, early data are laden with quite a large amount of uncertainties. And those uncertainties, we've seen day one data, and there were a couple of cards that were super high, and now they disappeared from the super high because they were based on 20,000 games. And in the early format, when no one knew what they were doing about, now we see, the proper cream of the crop rise to the top situation. But still, by sticking to the data almost religiously, you are cutting your exploration phase of the format short. And I think that, I am a data person. I analyze the data for my sort of hobby job. And I don't look at the data while I'm drafting early in the format. Occasionally, when I have like a weird pick and I'm thinking about a card, I will take a sneak peek at the 17Lands data. But I'm not doing it like every single second. I'm trying to figure out which cards are working, and I'm trying to use my mistakes to learn something about the format. And this results usually in a pretty low win rate for me in the first week of the format or so. I almost always finish the format at around 61-62% win rate, which is, I would say, good. But after a week, I frequently will have something like 55% win rate. And that's because I invest the first week of the playing into learning the format the hard way, and use the data as my sort of support system, but not as my autopilot. And I think that this is the very important distinction that is going to be productive for you if you want to carry on winning into the late format. There are different groups of players, and I know that some people are really, really having a high win rate in the early days, and then it drops off. And for me, this is a signal of something. It's a signal of being able to play limited by abusing the open strategies, but not being able to win consistently when you need to carve your own path, because people know which cards are good. The easy solutions have dried up. And that's why I think that this early investment, if you're playing regularly, is going to be important. If you're the kind of a person that plays for the first week or two and then does something else, I don't know, plays Constructed or doesn't play Magic, that's fine. You can abuse those early strategies, and then probably also you should be playing more quick draft, where abusable strategies is the name of the game. That's the actual riddle of the quick draft. It's how to play the bots, and it's a different game. There's nothing worse about it. There's nothing better about it. It's just different. But this is probably more of your jam because it plays into your strengths. If you are into figuring out the format, then you should probably, first of all, use the first weeks to acquire the knowledge, but also you should play much more, not in the first week, but in weeks 3, 4, 5, when the format is static, the pick orders have solidified, and that's the moment when you can use this knowledge and you can basically win much more than you would in the early days when you were still experimenting. So there goes my preamble, and with that out of the way, we can actually move to the data. First of all, I usually start with the color popularity rankings, and we have 5 colors, so roughly they should be played. This is normalized for the fact that there are 2 color decks, so I divided by 2, but colors are played roughly at 20% rate. In some formats, you will see a color that is played at 25, 26%. That's usually the busted color that people are forcing in the first days, and some color that is dropping down to 12, 13. But not in Duskmourn. In Duskmourn, we see 4 colors are pretty close to this 20% expected value that you would find in a perfectly balanced format, and only black is lagging slightly behind at 16%. But that's, I think, the closest that I've seen so far since I started doing this presentation, which must have been somewhere close to Midnight Hunt. So for quite some time, I've been doing that, and I've never seen something that was as balanced as Duskmourn is. White is played 22% of the time, blue is played 20% of the time, red is played 20% of the time, green is played 21.5% of the time. And, those small numbers add up and compensate for the fact that black is at 60%. But 4 colors, neck and neck, with a slight advantage of white and green, but not that much, really. So it looks like it's a really well-balanced format in terms of how people play it. But of course, that doesn't mean much. Maybe this balance is fake and one color wins much more than the others? No, is the answer. In terms of win rates of colors, it's also really, really strongly balanced. So average win rate is 55.3 for the 17Lands data, and white and red are the top colors with 55.6% win rate. That's a massive 0.3% more than the average. And then we have green at 55.3% win rate, blue at 55.1% win rate. They are basically dead level. And there is no differences between those colors in terms of their win rate. And black is lagging behind by 2 percentage points at 53.5. So it's super balanced both in how people play it and in how people win with it. And this is something beautiful. And I think that that's a big success of the design team to design a set that is even in the early format so well balanced, and you can win with basically anything. It's slightly more difficult with black, but this is not like a huge disadvantage of black. It means black is still quite playable. It's just you have to keep in mind that probably it's weaker, and you might want to pick your lanes a bit more stringently when you're playing black, and you want to make sure that some black important cards are wheeling or appearing later in the pack. Is DSK a 2-color format? That's the question I ask about every format. This one looks really 2-colored. So 67.5% of the decks are straight 2 colors. 21.8% are 2 colors and a splash, which adds up to roughly 90% of all the decks being 2 colors or 2 colors with a splash. And then there's like 7% of 3-color decks and fractions of percent of anything else. So people at least play it as a 2-color format quite decisively. Also, another hallmark of a 2-color format is that the win rate drops from 2 colors as you add splashes and 3 colors and 3 colors and splash. And this format is very much like that. 2-color decks have a 56.3% win rate. 2 colors and a splash decks have a 53.9% win rate. and then it drops to 51.2 at 3-color and 49.1 at 3 colors in the splash. So there is a penalty for splashing. And this is the thing, that adding a third color will probably improve the power of your cards, at least in some cases, because you can add best 7 cards from 3 colors rather than best 11 cards from 2 colors. So hopefully they will be stronger. But of course, by adding colors, you lose consistency of your deck, and balance between how much consistency you have and how much you add in power is going to determine those win rates. And in some formats, like Streets of New Capenna, the 3-color decks were winning more. That format was designed to be played in 3 colors, and you saw that 3-color decks had a higher win rate than 2-color decks, or at least non-different. This is not one of those formats, and I'm not saying that you cannot splash. I'm just saying that splashing will frequently be detrimental to your win rate. So you need to figure out when splashing is good. And I'm actually going to give some examples of cards that are very good, very good splashes in certain archetypes, and try to argue why those cards are good splashes in those particular archetypes. So we're going to reach that when we're going to touch on each of the 2-color pairs. Since it's a 2-color format, let's look at the 2-color combinations. And in a perfectly balanced format, you would play each of the 2-color combinations 10% of the time. This one is pretty well balanced again. Last set, I think that the top archetype we've seen was around 25% of the field, or 20%, somewhere in that range. Here, Azorius, which is the top played color combination, is 15.4, so 5 percentage points above the perfectly balanced format value. And then we have another Boros with around 15%, Simic 12.5, Gruul 11.8, Golgari at 10.1. So they're exactly on the expected value. And then we have the 5 archetypes that are slightly lower. Selesnya, Rakdos, Orzhov, and Izzet all are at around 7.5% frequency, and Dimir is the least played with 5.3, which is little, but little in previous format was something like 3 or 3.7, that kind of numbers we were seeing. So it is not perfectly balanced, but is closer to being perfectly balanced in terms of what people play than any other format that I've been analyzing so far, I think. I didn't do exact numbers, but eyeballing it, it looks really, really well balanced, and people did not find this dominant archetype that they are forcing in week 1, which is interesting because normally they do. So it's going to be interesting how this converts into the late format. Oh, that's a disgusting thing. In terms of the win rate of those color pairs, and I kept the same order. So I kept the same order from Azorius to Dimir, from the most popular to the least popular. And you might not have noticed because it looks almost perfectly aligned with what people are playing and how much are they winning with it. Azorius and Boros, the 2 most popular decks, also have the highest win rate at 58.1. I'm assuming this will mean that people are going to be drafting more Azorius and more Boros into next week. And it will result in the win rate of those decks dropping. Then we have Simic and Gruul at around 57% win rate. These are the 3rd and the 4th most popular decks, and these are the 3rd and 4th most winning decks. So there we go. Then we have Golgari, which is the 5th most popular deck and the 5th most winning deck at 55.4. Then we have a drop in Selesnya, 53.1. I think that in the early days, people were drafting Selesnya much more robustly, but I think that the word is now out that survival is not the most successful mechanic designed ever, and because of that, Selesnya decks are taking a penalty for their win rate at 53. Rakdos is the 7th most popular archetype, but it actually is the 6th most winning, and it's pretty close to Golgari, so it's at 55. So I would classify Rakdos as one of the 6 better decks, and I would classify Selesnya, Orzhov, Izzet, and Dimir, which are all at around 53-52% win rate, as the 4 lagging behind decks. I'm not saying that those decks are unplayable, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to figure out at least some of them, and they will become much better in the second half of the format. But for now, they are lagging behind. So yeah, Orzhov is at 52.3, Demir 52.1, and Izzet is at 51.7% win rate. If you don't usually listen to my content and you're wondering why all of them are over 50%, that's something to do with the average win rate of the 17Lands users, which is, as I said, for the two-color decks, 55.7. And this is counting both pure two-color decks and two colors with the splash. So something for you to keep in mind. Okay. We're going to look through all of those, and we're going to look at important cards that look like traps for each of those color pairs. So if you're interested in specifics of the builds, stay with me, and we're going to get to that. But first, we're going to look at general color evaluation. So I'm going to look at the best bombs defined as cards that have 62 or more game in hand win rate. Game in hand win rate, obviously at 17Lands, is the win rate of a card when it's been at any stage of the game in your hand. And this is, I think, the best sort of metric for the card power, because in an average game, if you have a deck and you have, let's say, one copy of Murder in that deck, and you play 10 games, normally somewhere between 5 and 4 games, you will draw that card, which means that between 5 and 6 games, you will not see it. So counting the win rate of those games when you didn't see the card is giving a lot of credit to the other cards in your deck. When you had Murder in your hand, well, at least it had some impact of the game, most likely. So because of that, that subfraction of the games is going to give you a better impression of the power of the card itself and not of the power of the cards surrounding it. You will still have like a big signal of cards surrounding it, but it will be smaller than if you look at all the games that the card was in the deck. Okay, first of all, white bombs, and there's 3 of them. Overlord of the Mistmoors. That card is absolutely broken. 7 mana for a 6/6. When it enters or attacks, you create 2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. So that's a 6/6 plus a 2/1 plus a 2/1. So like a 10/8 of stats, 4/2 of which are flying across 3 bodies. That's a lot, even though it costs 7 mana. But there's more. You can cast it for 4 mana, and you get the insects. So you get the 4/2 flying power. And it is an enchantment for next several turns, 4 precisely. And every turn you remove a counter from it, and once you remove the last one, it becomes the creature, and then it can start attacking and generating more value for you. So a card is great to play on turn 4, and great to play on turn 7. If you cast it on turn 4, on turn 7 it will become a creature, as if you would have normally cast it. It's just insane how good that card is. I still didn't play with it, and I'm also very happy that I never had to play against it, because it looks like a misery. We also have Ghostly Dancers. That card might have escaped some of you, at least, the fact that it's so powerful, because it looks understated, honestly, because when you look at it, it's like a 5 mana 2/5 flyer, which is not a great rate, but the abilities of it are incredible. So first of all, when it enters, you can return an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand, or you can unlock a locked room, a door of a room that you control, and it says Eerie. So whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, create a 3/1 white spirit creature token with flying. And I played with this card a couple of times. Every single time it was great. And I played against it, unfortunately, and I didn't win those games. Normally, the pattern is on turn 5, you cast it, you unlock a door, and you make a 3/1 flyer, which means that it from the 2/5 flyer for 5 mana, it becomes a 5/6 flyer. So basically Mahamoti. And then if it doesn't die, any enchantment you cast give you a 3/1 flyer. So if opponent untaps with it, you're probably in the world of trouble, because I can guarantee you that they have some enchantments in their hand. And the third one is Dollmaker's Shop and Porcelain Gallery. Dollmaker's Shop is 2 mana a room. And it says that whenever one or more non-toy creatures you control attack, a player you create a 1/1 white toy artifact creature token. So basically, every attack you make, you create a 1/1 most of the time. And then there's the second side of it, 6 mana for Porcelain Gallery, and that means creatures you control have base power and toughness, each equal to the number of creatures you control. So if you have 5 creatures, you have 5/5/5s. And that's usually enough to end the game in very quickly. And of course, because you're getting the dolls from the doll maker shop, usually you will have quite a lot of creatures. So it is a very snowbally card and very powerful. Over 62% win rate is a lot. For the top commons, number 1, and it's actually the top common of the set so far, although don't put too much weight on the top common or second top best common or third best common in this set, because as with the win rates of colors and color pairs, it is pretty even there. So Trapped in the Screen is first, and it has like, I don't know, 59.5% win rate or something. But the Chasing Pack is very close. The differences between the first and the 10th are not that huge. So of all the commons, I'm not talking about white commons. Of course, the difference between the best and the 10th best white common are quite large. But when looking at all the commons, it's not a massive difference between them. So treat those cards as they are good. Also, those cards will often have be better in some homes than in others. Trapped in the Screen is a universally good card, but obviously it's going to be better if you have some eerie synergies, because then you get an extra trigger from casting it or making it enter the battlefield. Trapped in the Screen, of course, is an Oblivion Stone, Oblivion Ring, but with Ward 2. I think it cannot exile any type of permanent, only artifact, creature, or enchantment, which is fine. Doesn't get the Planeswalker, but I think you can survive one of those 1 in 100 games that someone has Kaito. Number 2 common is Unsettling Twins, 4 mana for a 2/2, and when it enters, you manifest Dread. So you basically look at the top 2 cards and choose one of them, put it face down, and it becomes a 2/2 creature. So 2 2/2s for 4 mana. We've seen that card a lot of time in different versions. There was the red one in which set was that? Murders at Karlov Manor that made a was it Suspected Creature as a 2/2, or did it make a detective? Well, one of the two. I think it made the Suspected Creature, yeah, because it couldn't block. That card was great in aggressive decks. Unsettling Twins is probably better because you get a normal 2/2 that can have something good underneath, and it gives you some card selection sometimes. Sometimes you can bounce those things into your hand and reuse the spell. There's plenty of interesting play. But on the face of it, it's just a 2 2s for 2. Great card. And number 3 is a card that sort of surprised me. I was playing that card quite a lot. But I thought I'm doing something wrong by playing it. And it turns out that numbers show that it is actually a good card. And I was caught a bit of-footed by that. Seized from Slumber. That's a 5 mana instant, destroy target creature. But you can pay 3 less for that. So you just pay 2 mana at instant speed, and it destroys a tapped creature then. Which is, when I thought about it, it sort of makes sense. It's normally the, pay 2 mana, destroy attacking creature is not a good card because you can't put it in your aggressive decks because you will be often attacking and the opponent will not attack you. So that card is just rotting in your hand and nothing happens. And only when you're on the back foot, when usually those aggressive decks, when they are on the back foot, they are probably going to lose, like 7 out of 10 times. Then that card becomes useful. So it becomes useful in the situations you don't want to be in, and they are not useful in the situations you want to be in. And that means that any other card in your deck, like a vanilla 2/2, would be better than that card in 70% of the games. But this card can be okay when you're being attacked in those rare situations, but also 5 mana removal is something that you might be happy with late in the game as a curve topper when you play the 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and then you have like a good attack, you kill the biggest thing, swing with everything, and you force your opponent to trade a lot of the board, and you basically gain momentum by casting it for 5. So card is not bad, and generally removal is good in this set. As you can see, out of the top white commons, 2 are removal spells. When it comes to uncommons, we have cheaps. Cheap things are good. And top uncommon in general, I think, in the whole set is Sheltered by Ghosts. That's the 2-mana aura. You enchant a creature, and as it enters, you exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this aura leaves the battlefield. And the enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward 2. So it becomes really hard to kill. Better, and lifelink gives potential for racing successfully, especially when you put it on something evasive like a flyer. Card is great, just play it. I play it a lot. In every white deck, it's good. Then the second white uncommon is Optimistic Scavenger. That's a 1-mana 1/1, and whenever an enchantment you control enters, or whenever you unlock a room, so Eerie, I'm not going to read Eerie ever again, I'm just going to say Eerie, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, which is great because you can put those counters also on the Optimistic Scavenger, something that was not happening with similar creatures from the past. Card is great, and obviously it's great in blue-white decks that specifically play a lot of Eerie, but I looked at the data and it also does well in other decks, in white-red, in white-black, in white-green. It also does well. So this card looks like it's a specifically blue-white card, but it's not. It has decent numbers in every single color combination, and it's played much lower rate in other color combinations. So I would say try to experiment with it. Obviously, you don't have to put it in every deck, and you have to be selective, and you just need to figure out what number of enchantments you have in your deck. But if you have, 5, 6, probably Optimistic Scavenger is good enough to be in your deck. And don't worry, I will add up those numbers once we get the game data, but it's just not available yet. So I have to speculate about the acceptable number of enchantments for the Optimistic Scavenger. And of course, good part of the fact of this card in this particular set is that when you have a couple of rooms, like 3, 4 rooms in your deck, well, each room counts as sort of 2 enchantments. So you will not draw them every single time, but you will get much more value from them once you have Optimistic Scavenger. And the number 3 uncommon is Splitskin Doll, a 2-mana artifact creature. It's a 2/1, and when it enters, you draw a card, and then you discard a card, or not if you control another creature with power 2 or less. So frequently it will be just 2-mana, 2/1, draw a card, which is a great rate. And sometimes it will be a 2/1, draw a card, discard a card. And actually, we're going to see that in some decks, that's probably a benefit. For this set, the value of a card being manifested doesn't show up in the game in hand. No, it does not, unless you bounce it back to your hand somehow. Okay, blue. Blue is doing well in this set, but only has one card that qualified as a bomb, and at least at higher rarities. There is one card at uncommon which has the win rate of a bomb, which we should probably address. So Sheltered by the Ghost also is an uncommon that has a win rate that would qualify it as a bomb, according to my categories. But it's Overlord of the Flat Pits. All those Overlords are great. They all have the impending thing, so you can cast them cheaper and get the ETB. This one is a 5/3 flyer, and when it enters, you draw 2 cards and then discard a card. And when it attacks, same thing happens. That's big evasive threat that generates like card advantage. Always will be a 2/1 plus, maybe 2.5 for 1, because you see many cards. You have some card selection. Just play it, whatever. Top blue commons, and I'm super happy because Magic Data Science does this competition before every set is released, when you have to guess which cards are going to have the highest win rate from each color. And for blue, I picked Glimmer Burst and Unable to Scream as my bonus because I believed in that card. And both of those cards are in top blue commons, very close to each other. Glimmer Burst is a 4-mana draw to make a 1/1 enchant enchantment creature token. Unable to Scream is a 1-mana aura enchant creature. It becomes an 0/2 toy in addition to its other types, and loses all the abilities. So and can't be turned face up. So it basically turns the whatever creature it was into an 0/2. And those two cards are doing well. They are split in the top 3 by Vanish from Sight, 4-mana instant, and it's a classic target permanent. Put it on the top or bottom. The owner of target permanent chooses whether to put this permanent on top or bottom of their library, and you get a surveil one. So it's like a classic tempo removal. Sometimes opponent will not be able to afford to redraw certain spells or certain creatures or permanents, so they will put it at the bottom. So then it becomes a 4-mana instant speed, kill something in blue. Sometimes it will stop them from effectively deploying their threats. They play a 4-drop, you put it back on the top of their library. They redraw it, they replay it, you do it again. Oh, what do they do now? You have probably had your board that was advantageous. You start putting pressure, and they have to think, can I afford to recast that spell one more time? Can I afford not to draw anything for one more turn? And very often the answer will be no. While you are getting some card selection by casting those because you're surveilling, so you're getting more cards that you can deploy later. Great card. All 3 of those are quite successful in blue, and maybe not obviously so. So take a look at those cards. For the top uncommons in blue, Unnerving Grasp, that's the Mana War. 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand and manifest dread. So not only it can return any permanent, it can return your things, and you, instead of getting a 2/2 like in Mana War, you get a manifest dread, which can be sometimes better. So very interesting card, very powerful card, and has a win rate of 62 point something, which would qualify it as a bomb. It's very, very powerful. It's a really good card, especially so often in this set, you want to return your own cards, which, see, I made a segue here, which brings me to the number 2 blue uncommon, Fear of Isolation. That's a 1 and a blue, 2/3 flyer. As an additional cost to cast this spell, return a permanent you control to its owner hand. And yeah, it's brilliant that it's a cost. So most of the time, you cast it when you want to return something. And even if the Fear of Isolation itself is going to be countered, you still get to return your thing to your hand, which is neat. It's a big creature. It's an enchantment creature as well. But big. 2/3 flyer for 2 mana is big. And there's plenty of cheap stuff that you want to be returning to your hand and recasting it. So really good card. And Floodpit's Drowner is another one. That's a 2 mana 2/1 flash vigilance. And when it enters, you tap target creature and put a stun counter on it. And for 2 and a blue, you can tap it and shuffle it and the creature and a creature with the stun counter on it into their owner's library. So Fear of Sherkovitz. Who would have that kind of fear? I'm absolutely benign. Unless you ask me about the speed of the format. Then I can go berserk. Floodpit Drowner is a great tempo creature. You can cast it before opponent attacks, tap something down. It doesn't untap the next turn. It doesn't untap the next turn. So you basically lock the creature for 2 turn cycles, and it's great. While chat decides what Fear of Sherkovitz would do, let's go to the black bombs. We have 3 of those. The top black card, so for now, is Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber Room. And that's the Phyrexian Arena on one side, but you lose 2 life. Unless you control a demon, when instead of losing life, you actually drain opponent for 2. And where would you get a demon, you might ask? Well, Ritual Chamber, the second room in that room enchantment, is 5 mana, make a 6/6 black demon creature token with flying. Simple, big, efficient. The drain is really bad. I drafted a deck yesterday evening. I thought it was absolutely terrible. I was ready to go 0-3 with it. And I had the Unholy Annex and Ritual Chamber in it, and that thing carried me to like a 4-3, which was fine. Then we have Overlord of the Bailmork. As all the Overlord, it's good. If you see an Overlord, pick an Overlord. Very simple heuristic and limited. 5 mana, 5/5. When it enters or attacks, you mill 4 cards and you return a non-avatar creature card or a planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So it doesn't get other overlords. I'm sorry, but it can get Kaito if you have Kaito in your thing. And impending is 2 mana, so for 2 mana you can just mill 4 and return something to your hand, and in 5 turns it becomes a creature. And the last one is an unstoppable slasher, 3 mana, 2/3 death touch. When it deals combat damage to a player, they lose half of their life rounded up. So that can eat huge chunks of damage. And you would say, yeah, well, I'll just block it with a 3/3 and it dies. Well, it doesn't, because when it dies, if it had no counters on it, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with 2 stun counters on it. So it will die, come back, tapped for a couple of turns, and then go again. If you have like a longer game plan, that thing just becomes relentless. You just need to jump it. It got death touch, so whatever you put in front of it, it's going to die anyway. Awful card to play against. Top commons in black. I dare you, chat. Find a common theme. Final Vengeance. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or enchantment, exile target creature. Winter's Intervention. Winter's Intervention deals 2 damage to target creature, you gain 2 life. Murder. Destroy target creature. Chat is stumped. They have no idea what can link those cards. Well, they all 3 are removal spells, in fact. And this is sad for me, really, because you might think that this is because removal is good in this set. But I don't think it is. I think it's just because black creatures at common for a long time are garbage. And I think that the design team has adopted this philosophy of, you know what, black has the best removal. It doesn't. Black removal spell hasn't been the best removal spell in the format for years. Top common in this set is a white removal spell. And we're going to see better red removal spells at common. But that's the philosophy. Because it gets good removal spells, we can make the creatures rubbish. And that's why black is struggling for several sets already. I mean, there's been some good black decks, don't get me wrong. But it's been in the formats where there were decent black creatures. This one does not have that good creatures, unfortunately, and it suffers for that. That's why black is lagging behind. I don't think that it's a situation that cannot be somehow remediated, but it's definitely a big problem. And I think it's time for the design team to start making good black creatures. And, in every color combination, you will get this, I don't know, classic creature that they print almost in every set. The 3 mana white thing that makes a 1/1 as well. Or some flyer with a mediocre ability in blue, and the red hasty guy or something. Black does not have that kind of an identity. There is sometimes like a cheap death touch guy, and usually that thing is actually quite good. But in this set, we don't even have the cheap death touch guy. We just have a very expensive and very, very bad death touch guy for 4 mana. So I think that the problem with the black creatures in this set are going to be something that's going to mar black decks in general. And I think that it's time for the design team to step up and start building good black creatures, because murder is no excuse for not putting decent creatures in the set, because murder is not even that amazing right now. And it's the 4th set of the year that has murder in it. So maybe that formula is growing a bit old. In terms of uncommons, and again, we have 2 removal spells, Nowhere to Run, Flash Enchantment that gives something -3/-3, and also you can target things with hexproof, and ward abilities don't trigger, which is a neat addition. Plus, it's an enchantment, so it stays on board. Decent thing to sacrifice for things like Final Vengeance, that have sacrifices and additional cost. Then we have Commune with Evil, and I think that this is a card that lots of you might be sleeping on. 2 and a black for a sorcery. Look at top 4 cards, put one of them in your hand, the rest in your graveyard, gain 3 life. That gain 3 life is so good because you spend turn 3 on doing nothing, searching your library for something. The 3 life gives you that cushion to recoup some of the life you're going to lose because you are not on board. And the extra card hopefully will later allow you to stabilize. And then last one, we have Live or Die, 5 mana, instant. You choose one, you either reanimate something at instant speed or you destroy target creature. So decent removal. It's just slightly expensive, but flexibility of being able to reanimate something more than covers for that. So Live and Die is definitely one of the top uncommons here for black. Red bombs. I only managed to get 1 card in the bomb range for the red. Some of them are really close, and there is a bunch of really good red cards, but only 1 crossed my threshold. And guess what? It's the Overlord. Still good. Every Overlord is good. And this one is, 6 mana, 5/5. When it enters or attacks, you deal 4 damage to any target. Just like gross card. And it has impending for 4 mana. For the top commons, the top one is actually Turn Inside Out. Humble combat trick, instant. Target creature gets +3/+0 until end of turn. When it dies this turn, manifest Dread. And that card looks pretty solid. We've seen this type of card before. They're sometimes good, sometimes pretty bad. This one looks like a pretty good one. The fact that it's an instant is a bonus because a bunch of red decks want to have Delirium, and that gives you a very cheap way of putting one of the types that is not so common in this set. I still haven't drafted a deck where Turn Inside Out would be busted, but other people clearly have. So don't use my ineptitude in drafting aggressive red decks in this format as an excuse. Numbers are quite clear. Card is good. Obviously, you cannot overload your deck on this type of card. And good part of it being a combat trick means that you will get probably access to one of them per draft if you should be drafting red. So you will have access to it. So you shouldn't worry. Scorching Dragonfire is a different story. That card you probably need to draft high. Do not like that Scorching Dragonfire is in a set where there are no dragons, because who produces the set Dragonfire? They could have maybe made different name. But here we are. 2 mana for dealing 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If that creature or planeswalker would die this turn, you exile it instead. Exile part is very important. There are several below 3 toughness creatures with multiple types that have either death triggers or would contribute to 2 types for Delirium. It's nice to remove those. There are some recursive threats that you want to kill through that. And 2 mana for 3 damage is very efficient. It is not as good as Take Out the Trash was in Bloomsboro, but it's not far off. So still pick it as it was your premium cheap removal spell in any deck. And we have Clockwork Percussionist, a 1 mana 1/1 with haste. When it dies, you exile the top card of your library, and you may play it until the end of your next turn. So a 1/1 that does some early damage if you cast it early, but later in the game can be turned into a source of card advantage quite easily. Uncommons, Eomer is still good. Razorkin Hordecaller is number 1. Great uncommon for now. 4/4 with haste for 5 mana is already half decent, but this also has, whenever you attack, create a 1/1 red gremlin creature token. Now, good part of it is that if you don't want to ram it into a 5/5, you can attack with something else, and you're still gonna get the 1/1 red gremlin, because it's whenever you attack, not whenever you attack with Razorkin Hordecaller. Great card. Just play it as a top end of your red decks, and you're gonna be happy about it. Then we have Irreverent Gremlin, 2 mana 2/2 with Menace, which again is a good stat line for a creature. I mean, it would be like a decent common just with those stats. But it has more. It has, whenever another creature you control with power 2 or less enters, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Do this only once each turn. And that's such a great ability. All those like recent 2-mana Ramage creatures in red were decent, and this is one of the better ones, honestly. So no wonder it's at uncommon. I'm super happy to play it in any of my red decks. Card selection is good. It's going to win you games. And last we have the removal spell, Betrayer's Bargain, 2-mana instant, but it has an additional cost. You either sacrifice a creature or pay 2. And it deals 5 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Again, important that you get exile. Red gets a lot of exile effects, and that's very annoying when you play reanimate target and then it gets exiled and you cannot reanimate it. Betrayal's Bargain, solid card. Sometimes sacrificing a creature enchantment is going to be a benefit for you when you're playing like black red or something. So and sometimes paying 4 mana for that effect is not a terrible deal. So really great. The flexibility it offers is just premium. Green bombs, we have 2. We have Valgavoth's Onslaught. If you don't know what it does, you're probably going to learn because it's just a rare. XX green. You manifest dread X time and then put X +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. So like 3 mana, you got a 3/3 manifest dread creature. For 5 mana, you got 2 4/4s. For 7 mana, you got 3 5/5s. And for 8 mana, for 9 mana, you won. I mean, you just make what? 4 6 6s should be good enough to win the game. If it's not, I don't know what you were doing before and how you were not dead yet. Card looks great and is great and plays great. I played it in my FNM yesterday. It was sick, even though I played a 3-color deck. But because we didn't have enough people, I had to play Winston draft, so 3-color decks are not that terrible. And having Valgavoth Onslaught in my very synergistic, otherwise enchantment blue-white deck was still fine. It was still good. One game that I didn't manage to override my opponent with 1/1 Gremlins. I just drew Valgavoth's Onslaught and just put 3 5/5s into play and finished the game through that. And then we have Tyvar the Pummeler, 3 mana 3/3. You can tap a creature you control to give it indestructible until end of turn, and then you tap it. So the sort of like normally white uncommon 3/1 creatures get that kind of an ability that you can pay some amount of something and that creature gets indestructible and you tap it. And that's a good ability already in its own, like a 3/3 that is really hard to kill, good creature. But there is definitely more, because for 5 mana, creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if Tyvar is your biggest thing, it still gives +3/+3 to all the team. If you have a 6/6, it gives +6/+6. If you can activate it twice, you first do it for 3 and then you do it for 6, which is also sweet. So yeah, Tyvar is like very hard to deal with, and unless you can remove it, you're probably losing that game. Unless the opponent is like 1 and you have some ways of pushing damage through. Green commons. Say its name is the top common, actually. That's the mill 3 cards. You return things from your graveyard to your hand. And it has another option. You can exile this and 2 other cards called Say Its Name from your graveyard. And you can search your graveyard, hand, or library for a card named Altanach the Thrice-Called and put it on the battlefield. And Altanach is a 9/9 trampler that when it gets targeted, you draw a card. So sometimes it's a combo, but this card is just good on its own. It's just what the green decks want to be doing in this set. They want to make Delirium. They want to utilize the graveyard, and Say Its Name does exactly those things. Then we also have Spineseeker Centipede. 2/1 insect. When it enters, you search your library for a basic and you put it in your hand. Also has a Delirium. It becomes a 3/3 vigilant creature when you have Delirium. And yeah, that card is still solid. We've seen better versions of that card, like Contagious Vorak from Phyrexia Obi-Wan was definitely better than that. But Centipede is good enough. It's more than good enough. It's the second best green common. And lastly, we have Manifest Dread, and you will never guess what that card does. 2 mana, Manifest Dread. For the uncommons, there is one that is cut above the rest, under the skin. And, I was giving stick to the design team for the black creatures and how rubbish they are in the recent sets. I'm going to give a lot of credit to the design team by remaking some iconic creatures in Magic's history. I told you about the Mana War before. Top uncommon in blue, one of the top uncommons in the whole set. Under the Skin, it's similar, just you pay 3 mana for a sorcery, you manifest Dread, and then after you manifest Dread, and that's important, after you manifest Dread, so you actually can choose which card of the two that you see are you going to put in the graveyard, you can return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So that's sort of Eternal Witness-ish creature. A 2/2 that returns a permanent from your graveyard to your hand sounds good, and is good, in fact. Second best green uncommon is something that actually surprised me. I thought it was not as good, but it clearly has results, and that's Threats Around Every Corner. 4 mana enchantment. When it enters, you manifest Dread, and whenever a face-down permanent you control enters, you search your library for a basic land, put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So by every time you manifest Dread, you also get a basic land from your deck onto the battlefield, which can fix you, which can ramp you, can do quite a lot of things, and has really good numbers. So yeah, keep an eye out on this card. And last, we have Patchwork Beastie, 1 mana 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill a card, but the problem is, unless you have a Delirium, it cannot attack or block. But the good part is that because you mill every turn, you quickly get to that Delirium, and you can get really fast to Delirium in this game. And then, of course, this gives you super advantage on the board because your opponent probably start playing things on turn 2, while you put a 3/3 on turn 1, and you hibernated it. It got suspend until I get Delirium, but once it can start attacking or blocking, it does it. Also, notably, if you have that card manifested, you can block with the Manifest Dread creature, flip Patchwork Beastie for just 1 mana to make it into a 3/3 and maybe eat something that opponent thought was trading. And you can do that even if you don't have Delirium, because if it already is in combat, it doesn't need to have Delirium to be in combat. It won't be removed from combat. It will just be there. So yeah, sweet card. And lastly, we have Multicolor Bombs. 2 of them reach the threshold. The Swarm Weaver, 2 black-green, 2/3. When it enters, create 2/1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying, and it has Delirium. If you have Delirium, insects and spiders you control get +1/+1 and have Death Touch. So sort of writing Chrysalis-ish creature. 4 mana, 2/3. You make 2 tokens. Not exactly that, because of course Chrysalis was growing itself. It ramped you. This doesn't, but it's still enough to make it into a level card, basically. So yeah, think about how busted Chrysalis was. And we have Zimone All Questioning, 1 green-blue for a 1/1. But at the beginning of an end step, if a land entered the battlefield under your control this turn, you get Primo the Indivisible, a legendary 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, and you put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So you need to have a prime number of lands. If you cast it on turn 3, you get a 3/3, and then when you play all your lands on turn 5, you will get a 5/5. On turn 7, you're going to get a 7/7. So Zimone is awkward in when you should be casting it, because you don't want to cast it when you don't have the trigger at the end of the turn that you cast her. But if you cast it on curve, it's great. And if you cast it later, you probably have to make sure that you play your 7th land on that turn or something. I'm assuming, you will rarely have a situation when you have 17/17 fractal, but in a 17-land deck, it's possible. Just need to play a very long game, and it's very hard to play a very long game if you, for example, had a 13/13 before, because that usually will end it. Also, notably, first time that Zimone is actually good, because last 2 incarnations of Zimone were looking decent but didn't deliver, and they were at uncommon, so that's fine. But this Zimone is a bomb, finally. Then a bit about the top multicolor uncommons, the signpost. Normally we only have 10 of them, but in Duskmourn we have whole 20. And that's why I selected top 11 of them. And there is a reason why I put the top 11. It's because after the 11th, there is a big drop in the win rate. So we have here between 62% from Midnight Mayhem, the top signpost for now, and 58.2 for the Inquisitive Glimmer, the lowest win rate one of them. These are all good numbers. Like, these are all good cards. And we have a bunch of the 61, 62% win rates. Midnight Mayhem, Arabella, another Boros one, is second, 62. Disturbing Mirth, the black and red, that card is way overperforming its archetype. So if you're drafting black-red, Disturbing Mirth is the reason to do that. Then we have Wildfire Wickerfolk, the Gruul 3-2 with haste, 61.5. Gremlin Tamer, the Azorius one, 61.3. Oblivious Bookworm, the Simic one, the looter that always loots and sometimes will draw instead of looting, 61.2. Brood Spinner, Golgari, that's around 61. Beastie Beatdown, the Gruul removal spell, 59.5. Growing Dread, the Simic enchantment that manifests dread, and every time you flip something, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Drag to the Roots, the removal spell in Golgari, and Inquisitive Glimmer. That's the other Azorius one, the one that makes enchantments cheaper. And all of those are really good cards. And there is 2 of each color combination present, except for Rakdos, where only Disturbing Mirth makes that list. And the other signpost is having like a 55% win rate, which is not good enough to be on this particular list. But 5.5 color pairs have excellent signposts, and 3.5 color pairs don't. And all the white-black uncommons don't make the list, not even close. All the blue-black don't make the list, and all the white-greens don't make the list. And actually, they are quite far from making the list. They both do pretty badly, the green and white signposts. So that's something to keep in mind for you. Okay, this is just the same slide that we've seen before, but this time I sorted the color pairs by win rate from highest to lowest. So from Boros to Izzet, with Boros at 58.1 and with Izzet at 51.7. So like 6.5% split between the top and the bottom. And I did it because from here, we're going to talk about each color pair. So let's start with the Boros, the top win rate archetype. And we have, for each category, we have 4 commons, and for uncommons, the same thing. We have the best common, we have the hidden gem, that for some reason I selected, and I'm always going to try to explain the reason why I selected. A card that is not obviously great, but has a decent win rate and is not played at a high rate most of the time. And we have a trap. These will be usually the cards that are played quite a lot and don't have good results, or look like they are good in particular archetype, but don't have a good result despite that. And for Boros, best common is Glimmerlight, and that was a big surprise. That's a 2-mana equipment. When it enters, you create a 1/1 white Glimmer enchantment creature token, and it equips for 1 mana, gives +1/+1, so sort of short sword. It has 60.2 game in hand win rate. That's a lot for a common. And you're going to see Glimmerlight quite a lot in other color combinations. This card is just good, it seems. It's underplayed, underdrafted, and has consistently good results in multiple archetypes. So that's the first find. We start on this bombshell. Glimmerlight is a card that you definitely should be paying more attention to in your drafts. And I was surprised because this looks like more like a blue-white card because it makes the enchantment, so it gives you the eerie trigger. But also in white-red, it's good because maybe white-red has smaller creatures, and making them slightly bigger will let you compete better with the decks that might be hard otherwise. And you can put Glimmerlight on something, attack with it. Most Valuable Slayer pluses it a bit, and becomes the 4-power first striker or something. Hidden gem I selected is Friendly Ghost. Friendly Ghost is a 4 mana 2/4 flyer. When it enters, target creature gets +2/+4. So it basically is sort of 4 mana 2/4 flying with haste, because most of the time it will enable you an attack with something. And that's just good enough. Card is not played a lot, but has a 59% game in hand win rate, which is great. It's like, I think, third best Boros common. And I can quickly check it. Let's go to Boros. Let's go to commons. No, it's a bit lower than that, but it's like sixth best common, but it's very close from the very close to the top. We have other cards in there like Turn Inside Out and Jump Scare. Both are doing really well in top 4 of the best commons. It's worth mentioning that they are good. The 1 mana combat tricks, again, because you're playing with small creatures, that's probably why the Glimmerlight is so good. But weirdly, Grand Entryway, which looks very similar to Glimmerlight, like for 2 mana you get a 1/1 Glimmer. For 3 mana, you sort of unlock it. You put 2+1/+1 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures. That card is not doing so well. It only has 54% win rate, and I'm still wondering why that is the case. Someone says that I love Friendly Ghost with the Jolly Balloon Man, and I think I should make a thread about cards that are really great with the Jolly Balloon Man, because there is a whole collection of good white and red cards that are fantastic with the Balloon Man to build maybe a grindier version of Boros. For the uncommons in white-red, best uncommon is Sheltered by the Ghost. 63.6 is a lot. That's the aura we mentioned. The exile something, gives lifelink, ward, +1/+0, like great. Fantastic to put on the Friendly Ghost, by the way. Your Friendly Ghost becomes a 3/4 flyer with lifelink and ward 2, which makes it super hard to kill, and it kills something. So yeah, great. Hidden gem I selected was the Optimistic Scavenger. I already mentioned to you that this card looks very much Azorius, but still 62% win rate in Boros decks. And it's not played at high rate. And I'm pretty sure that not every white-red deck will want one. But there's just enough enchantments lying around. And you can, for example, have the Glimmerlights of this world in your deck. That Optimistic Scavenger can become a good card in those decks. 61.9 is a high win rate. So don't think that this is just an Azorius card. I think it has more in its range than that. It's doing well in all the other white color combinations. So just generically good card, keeping in mind that you won't be able to put it in every deck, because obviously if you have 0 other enchantments, you don't want to play a vanilla 1/1. But the set is designed in such a way that you probably will have some. Like every white deck wants to have the screen removal. Most white decks will want to have the 2/2 fear of vigilance and surveilling, I want to call it. Well, fear of surveillance, something. So yeah, it's just good. Trap I selected is Violent Urge. I told you that the combat tricks are good, and Inside Out and Jump Scare both were doing really well as commons. Violent Urge looks promising. Its target creature gets +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn at instant speed. And if you have Delirium, it's double strike instead of first strike. But it only has 54% win rate, and I think that you just don't turn your Delirium often enough for it to be good. And at the stage where you can turn on Delirium, this card becomes less relevant as well, because the whole point of using those tricks is to pave your way in the game. Like your small threats can either trade and replace themselves in case of the turn Inside Out, or trade or push damage in case of Jump Scare for lethal. This one doesn't do either in this early game. And late game, when you have double strike, you might be way too far behind to make a difference through that. Blue-white. Top common is the Trapped in the Screen. 61.6, really good numbers for that card. That's like a key card for this, because it does 2 things that you have a problem with. Removes a big blocker, because your creatures are maybe smaller, and you have like maybe a wider board of 1/1s. Removing something really big can clear the path for your things to attack. And it's an enchantment for the eerie synergies. And hidden gem I selected is Seized from Slumber. 59.2% game in hand win rate is really high. This card doesn't look at first sight as the 60-ish% game in hand win rate card. And maybe you should update the information that Seized from Slumber is actually a good removal spell in this set. And especially good in white-blue, because it can be this curve topper when you start, like hopefully Optimistic Scavenger turn 1 and then some creatures, and then on turn 5 Seize the Slumber to seal the deal and win the game. Trap I selected is the Erratic Apparition, 3 mana, 1/3 flyer with Vigilance and Eerie. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn with Eerie. Just not enough in terms of power. It would have to be, I don't know, a 3 mana 2/2 flying Vigilance and Eerie. Then it would have been probably too good, though. So yeah, this card suffers from the fact that there's no half mana increments. If it was 2.5 mana, instead of 3, probably would have been a decent card, but for 3 mana, it's just not good enough. Maybe they should do a set with half mana, but you can only... No, a set with half mana. That would be interesting as a mechanic. In terms of uncommons, Sheltered by the Ghost, still good. 66.1% win rate in Azorius. That card is just insanely good in that deck. Because, again, you add to the range Sheltered by the Ghosts on Optimistic Scavenger on turn 2, and that's something that is amazing. Because you instantly swing with like a 3/2 lifelinker that will not die in the next couple of turns. But generically good in any situation in those decks. Hidden Gem I selected, and I went quite deep in there because lots of the cards in white-blue are high picks and good cards that people know are good. Lionheart Glimmer was the card that was maybe slightly underplayed, and this card is pretty good in that deck. Like 59%, that's same level as Seized from Slumber in terms of the win rate, but it's underplayed, and 59.1% is above the replacement level. So it's like an actively good card in those blue-white decks. Maybe especially in the ones that have the Gremlin Maker. Whenever you trigger Eerie, you make a 1/1 Gremlin. Because if you can build a board of like 4 or 5 of those Gremlins, you dump Lionheart Glimmer, swing with the Gremlins, and they become 2/2s. Good part of the Lionheart Glimmer, Ward 2 on it, 5 mana, 2/5. So you want to protect it. You don't want to die to like a 3 mana spell. And when you attack, the creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. It says again, when you attack, not when Lionheart Glimmer attacks. So any attack will make your creatures larger, which is fine. It means that the ability has sort of haste as well, which is, again, it's this neat on turn 5. Maybe instead of playing removal, you just cast Lionheart Glimmer, swing with the team, and they become bigger, and that will force opponent to trade unfavorably. And if they do, you still are left with this 2/5 that attacks as a 3/6. Trap, out of the obligation to humanity, I put Scrabbling Skullcrab, the 1 mana 0/3 crab skeleton with Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you unlock a room, target player mills 2 cards. We love mill. I love mill. I can't judge you for that because in the early access, the first game that I played was a game I milled the opponent out. Every one of us wants to win with mill, but it does hurt your win rate. So keep that in mind when you're trying to live the dream of milling through the Skullcrab. Yes, Mads Mexico is mirroring my sentiment. We all love milling people out because we know how it frustrates them. But unfortunately, it's hard to pull off. I managed to do it by activating my clone room and the one that doubles all the triggers, and then it was possible through that, but otherwise it's hard. Mind that in some games this can be a sideboard plan, because some of the manifest decks will fly close to the sun in terms of how they mill themselves out naturally, but again, it is a sort of a pipe dream. Mind Skinner is a real card, a head map. The chat is telling that they got some mill wins with Mind Skinner, the 10/1 unblockable creature. that creature is real. It has like a win rate that warrants playing it in decks. And again, as I said, some of those Manifest Dread decks are flying close to the sun. They will be finishing most of their games at like 8 cards in their library or something. And then one hit from the 10-1 is good enough to kill them. Let's move to Gruul. Best common in Gruul is the Scorching Dragonfire from the non-existing dragons. 60% win rate, solid card, really good. Just play it. It's a cheap removal, efficient removal, stops opponents' delirium, stops recursive threats. And with most of the cards that I think about, I have no idea how it works because probably it depends on which turn it's being cast. I was just thinking, how will it work with this 2/3 Death Toucher that we were talking about, that when it dies, it comes back? I have no idea. Will it exile it or will it the other ability trigger? We need a judge. Hidden gem I selected is a room. It's a very underplayed room in Gruul decks. Ticket Booth / Tunnel of Hate. Ticket Booth is just 3 mana Manifest Dread. And Tunnel of Hate is 6 mana. Whenever you attack, target attacking creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. This card has a solid 57.8% win rate. It's absolutely not bad. It's there and about in top 10 Gruul commons and is definitely underplayed. So start noticing this card when you're playing Gruul because it does look like it has just enough for it. Because the Manifest Dread creature will bring you closer to Delirium. Tunnel of Hate, if you manage to get to late game, can be the thing that makes you win because you are an aggressive deck. Sometimes you just run short of steam and leave opponent at like 4. Once opponent is at 4, attacking with any kind of 3/3 creature with double strike is going to be a problem for the opponent because they have to either chuck things and chump blocks or block with something big and lose it. It will stop them from being able to attack it. And yeah, the chat says Ticket Booth looks underrated because we are used to the other card, the Manifest Dread, that does the same for 2. But Manifest Dread does not have the second half that sometimes tells, oh, I'm going to also win that game. So probably that's the price you have to pay for playing the more opportunities, more flexibility through Tunnel of Hate. Trap I selected is Cryptid Inspector, 3 mana 2/3 vigilance creature. When a face down permanent enters or when it's flipped, you put a +1/+1 counter on Cryptid Inspector. And this card just doesn't grow reliably enough. Too often becomes a 2/3 vigilance vanilla creature, and especially in those Gruul decks. 51.8% win rate is not good enough. It's a card that probably is sort of a trap. And like probably many of you, I also played that card probably too much in my decks, and I will definitely adjust for that in the future. In terms of the uncommons, Under the Skin, the 3 mana Manifest Dread and return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand, is the best uncommon by quite far. 62.8% win rate. That card is just generically good. You will try to get Delirium with those decks, which means that you're going to be fueling your graveyard, and that card does the good job of that. Gem I selected is Rootwise Survivor, a 5 mana 3/4 haste with the survival ability. So survival ability is when it survives when you move to your second main phase and this thing is tapped, survival trigger kicks in. This one has a survival trigger. Put 3 +1/+1 counters on target land, and it becomes an elemental creature forever. It gains haste until the end of your turn. So this to me looked like a clunky card, and I lost to it a couple of times. And then I started thinking, maybe it actually is decent. And in Gruul, at least, it seems it is decent. And it mainly has something to do with Gruul will often be very aggressive. And again, in those situations when you run a bit out of steam, like with the Tunnel of Hate, Rootwise Survivor sort of sucker punches your opponent. All of a sudden, you just like cast this hasty creature. If they don't have a block for that particular creature at that particular moment, Maybe they can only chump it. Maybe they can only block it with the 4 toughness creature that doesn't have much power. You're going to turn one of your lands into another threat, and that's a good thing. The haste is probably the best combination for the survival mechanic, because often you just play a creature, opponent knows it's there, is ready for it, and that's it. Rootwise Survivor having the haste gives you the surprise factor that might be just enough to get that first survival trigger. And getting the first survival trigger on a survival creature is night and day difference. They become so much better. Not giving your opponent time to prepare for that is probably what pushes this card across the border, across the line. So yeah, Rootwise Survivor, decent top end for your aggressive green decks, it seems. Trap I selected, and Trap. 55% win rate is still not terrible. It's roughly average, but you need to sacrifice a high pick to pick that card, and it looks like it might be, slightly better than it is for those cruel decks. Is Fear of Exposure. 3 mana, 5/4 Trampler, but as an additional cost to cast it, tap 2 creatures or lands you control. And it's an enchantment creature as well. It's just a bit below rate for, I think, what it promises. So I wanted to showcase that it does not so great for those of you who, think that this is a bomb or something. It doesn't look like it. And this is like the most heartwarming slide that I've made, I think, in this kind of set review. First of all, for many of those early data seminars, I always had Simic as the last archetype because it had the lowest win rate, and usually all the cards on the slide were green. And here, all the cards are blue. Well, the trap thing maybe is not so much a merit for the blue, but the fact that both best common and the hidden gem for the blue-green archetype are blue is something very heartwarming. And the top common for this archetype is by far, it's like big difference between the first common and the second common, and it's vanished from sight, something that you might not have expected as a sort of like top common contender. But in blue-green, it is a card that has 61.5% win rate. And when we look at the other better archetypes in terms of win rate, Scorching Dragonfire had 60.3, Trapped in the Screen in Azorius had 61.6, so just barely more, and Glimmerlight and Boros had 60.2. So 61.5 is a lot. And Alex Cordocols was very high on that card, and Alex is playing mainly Simic, or at least plays a lot of Simic. And I think that those things are very well connected. This card is particularly good in Simic decks. Simic decks really do want to have that card, and keep that in mind while you're drafting. Hidden gem I selected is Glimmerburst. This card is great in Azorius, and no one is really surprised that it's great in Azorius. I just wanted to draw your attention that it's also really good in Simic decks. 59.1% is really high. Trap I selected because the card is played a lot. It looks like it might be good for the deck, but it not necessarily is. With only 54.4% win rate, is Underwater Tunnel and Slimy Aquarium. Why? First part is a 1 mana room you surveil to, neat. And second part is 4 mana, Manifest Dread, and put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. And I think that it's just a bit too much for the second room. The first one is great. And if there was something else on the second part, it probably would have been a decent card, but it's not. I think that this is the difference between Ticket Booth for 3 mana, Manifest Dread is just barely enough. This one for 4 mana, a 3/3 Manifest Dread is not enough. Then it can increase maybe over time, but just be careful this is not as a good card as you might have thought. I definitely overplayed that card for the duration of this format so far. Blue-green, uncommons. An Unnerving Grasp, yet again, is the top uncommon in a blue color combination. 63.5, the Mana War, the Manifest Dread Mana War, basically. Card is great. Let's move on. For the hidden gem, I selected Brood Spinner. because Brute Spinner is a black-green card. But it's a black-green card that got enough of the sample size to make it onto the list of cards in blue-green that have a win rate. So blue-green decks don't mind splashing Brute Spinner. And I think that there's a reason for that. Brute Spinner is black and green for a 2/3 reach with Surveil 2 when it enters. And for 6 mana and sacrificing Brute Spinner, you need to tap it. So you cannot do it when it's Summoning Sickness. You create a number of 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying equal to the number of cards types among cards in your graveyard. And it does look like an early drop because it's black-green cost, but in fact, it's really good at late in the game. When Surveil 2 becomes more powerful because you really are dependent on the top of your deck. And the sacrifice ability is most of the time online, and you probably have like 4 or 5 types of cards in your graveyard, so you're going to make 5 1/1 flyers. Brute Spinner sort of behaves a bit like that wall that made 1/1 flyers in Dominaria United. It is a game plan on its own, and I think because the game plan involves late game, because you need 6 mana for sacrificing Brute Spinner, it becomes a solid splash in the decks that will promote the same kind of plan. And blue-green, because it manifests Dread a lot, is going to promote that plan very well and fill your graveyard with card types. And that's why the Spider is good. And this is also to show you that, yes, it is a 2-color format, but some splashing is allowed and even beneficial, and Brute Spinner is a good example of exactly that kind of situation. I see chat is already doing similar things, so I guess it's good for the people in chat who are drafting Simic with Brute Spinners to get a confirmation data that what they are doing is actually working. Of course, the irony of it is that we know that it's working because those people are doing it. Otherwise, we would not have the data. Trap I selected is Altanak, the Thrice Cold. Only 56% game and hand win rate. There is also a trap in interpreting that kind of data. I mean, obviously, Altanak is at its best when you never drew it, because it's at its best when you exile 3 copies of Say It 3 times and you search for it from your library. So obviously, drawing is not so beneficial because you wasted a draw of something that you were happy to stay inside of your deck. But anyway, it got only 56% win rate, which is not terrible, but it's lower than I would think. So there is a price to pay for putting Altanak in your deck. And that price is that sometimes you draw it, and that's not the most beneficial thing to do. But sometimes you also cast it from outside of the library. So jury is still out whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. But surely if I have Say It thrice or Say It 3 times? How is it called? Say Its Name. There you go. Say Its Name. If you have 3-4 copies of it, I would definitely play Altanak when I have it. It's just that I'm going to assume that it's not as busted as I might think, because sometimes they draw it and it becomes a problem. Or at least less of a benefit. Swiftly moving to black-green. Instead of scrolling backwards to check the name of the card, I could have gone one slide further. Best common in Golgari is Say Its Name. So there we go. 59.2. It's exactly what this deck wants to be doing. It allows some sick early turns. Card is actively good. Just make sure to have some lands and creatures in your deck. Normally, I would say something that's not so hard to do, but in this set, you can run into decks that have too many of those under the skins of the world and so on. Cards that are not creatures that make creatures. So make sure that you put some creatures you can return. And obviously combos with Altanak. As a hidden gem, I selected Terramorphic Expanse because I want to show you, or at least hopefully explain to you, or try to make you realize how impressive is that 57.4 win rate on a land. It's just a land. Lands should have roughly the average win rate of your deck. The fact that a land has slightly above average win rate for the deck is something impressive. It means that Terramorphic Expanse plays an important role in those decks. It's one of the top 4 commons for black-green, and it has to do with being able to fix, being able to splash, fueling delirium, little small things that thinning your deck, which makes your manifest dreads more likely to hit a creature that you want to flip. All those little things add up for it to be a quite a decent card, and I would say outside of like top uncommons, rares, and maybe few top commons, this should be a priority for a deck to pick 1 copy or 2. Trap, again, it's Cryptid Inspector. In Gruul, you could have thought, you know what, Gruul is not supposed to be manifesting dread that much, so maybe that's why Cryptid Inspector is not good, because there's just not enough density of the manifest dread cards. But in this deck, it's still not great, even though black-green is potentially a better manifest dread deck. It was not terrible in the blue-black. I can check how Cryptid Inspector does in Simic in a short second. But even there, it's not doing well. So that makes me think that the card is, for the lack of a better word, bad. I can't find it though. Where is it? Cryptid Inspector, 55.2, which is not terrible, but it's like bottom middle of the pack for the commons. So yeah, a bit of a disappointment in Cryptid Inspector. Top uncommon for the black-green, and I love to see it that the signpost is the top uncommon, because it means that the design team did something well with that archetype. Brood Spinner at 61.7. We talked about this card. Same applies. Early great card with like a powerful late game plan. I would like to talk a bit more about Hidden Gem, and it's Commune with Evil with 60.1%. This is a low-key great card in multiple decks. And when you think that Say Its Name is the top common for this archetype, it shouldn't surprise you, really. Commune with Evil looks at the top 4 card of your library, puts 3 of them in the graveyard with your choice of what goes in the graveyard, so you can shape your Delirium very easily on turn 3. And you also gain 3 life, which sort of makes it possible to happen, because you cannot just play a do-nothing for 3 mana on turn 3 at sorcery speed. So by doing that, you're paying a huge price in your tempo. And Commune with Evil helps to patch that problem by giving you that extra life. So yeah, it's better than Say Its Name. And Say Its Name is the best common. So it's better than the best common in this archetype. Think about that card. Start playing with it. And I guarantee you're going to be happy with that, because I played with the card. It was great. Overgrown Zealot is my trap. Overgrown Zealot is my trap. Only 54.7 for a card that needs to be picked relatively highly. So it's the Mana Dork. It's an 0/4. The fact that it doesn't have any power enables opponents to attack into it efficiently, because they're not afraid that they're going to lose their creature. You can't even cast the Death Touch and Indestructible trick on it beneficially, because 0 power doesn't give any Death Touch. Ramping in Limited is overrated normally, and people put too much ramp into their decks and without a good purpose for doing so. 4 drops also not particularly strong in this set, especially in those green-black color pairs. So there is not like something to instantly ramp into, like you could do in some other sets in the recent years. So Overgrown Zealot, slight underperformer for that. Okay, Black-Red. Best common is Glimmerlight. Again, at 60.5% win rate. And I was very surprised in that, but especially that you cannot sacrifice artifacts for most of the sacrifice things in this set. But you can sacrifice the 1/1 and you're left with the short sword. So giving you a disposable body is just good enough that the card is decent in Black-Red. So yeah. Keep an eye on Glimmerlight in the future. Hidden Gem I selected is yet again Terramorphic Expanse, because as much as I could rationalize it why it was good in Golgari, It's mind-boggling how good this card is in Rakdos. Because I can't explain it, I am accepting that one of the possibilities is that it's just a fluke in the data. But if it's not, well, then keep an eye on that card and see how it performs in the black-red. And honestly, I think that I played black-red, but I cut their Morphic Expanse because I didn't think it was important. Maybe it is. And at first I thought maybe it's because of the Delirium. But also the trap I selected is Hand That Feeds, the 2-mana 2/2 that when you have Delirium, whenever it attacks, it gets +2/+0 and Menace until end of turn. So if the like low-hanging fruit common Delirium payoff is not good in this deck, what is the Terramorphic Expanse doing on that list? But 58.1 is a hell of a win rate for a land, so there must be something with it. And yeah, don't tell me. I know there are fringe cases that something happens when you sacrifice a permanent, but that shouldn't have such a huge impact on how the card's win rate looks like. In terms of the uncommons, Disturbing Mirth, the signpost, is a top Rakdos uncommon, 62%. And I played against this card a lot, and it's disheartening when opponent casts this, draws 2 cards, then they sacrifice this to removal, it kills your thing, and yet they manifest dread, completely can change the board state with a couple of cards that are needed for sacrificing the Disturbing Mirth as a synergy. So yeah, great card. Hidden Gem I selected. I didn't have like a huge choice of what I can pick because most of the top cards in black-red are just good cards in black and good cards in red. So couldn't have any like hidden gem part. They were just gems. I did in the end selected Fear of Burning Alive, not because the card is not drafted or not played. It's just that it's played at a much lower rate in Rakdos decks. So very few games played with that card compared to what people drafted it. Maybe because they thought 6-drop is too much. This data suggests that 6-drop is not too much when it has this kind of an effect. Yeah, I mean, Fear of Burning Alive is game. And by the way, that's a 6-mana nightmare creature, enchantment creature. It's a 4/4. When it enters, it deals 4 damage to each opponent. But if you have Delirium, whenever any source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, if you have Delirium, you can ping the same amount of damage to target creature. And because this thing, when it enters, deals 4 damage. If you have Delirium, it will do 4 damage to opponent and 4 to one target your opponent controls. Glassworks, the room, second part of it is an enchantment that pings your opponent for 1 at the end of turn. With Fear of Burning Alive on board, those 1 damage pings also ping a creature. So sometimes they make combat impossible because they know that after the combat, Fear of Burning Alive is going to ping out one of their creatures and stuff like that. 59.4 is not amazing, but it's very, very solid. So you can play this 6-drop in black-red decks. Trap I selected is Infernal Phantom. 4-mana 2/3 with Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control or open room, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So say that you cast it on turn 4, untap, cast an enchantment, and then cast something to sacrifice this thing, and ping something for 4, which is great. Well, which is not really great because it doesn't work that well. So this is the dream that the card is offering, and looking at the numbers, that dream is rarely fulfilled, and potentially because there's not so many enchantments to trigger Eerie in black and red. And we're going to see this card potentially one more time in blue and red, which will have abundance of enchantments, but there you just don't have ways of making that creature die very easily. And even in the sacrifice deck, death triggers are not something that just automatically turns on. So keep in mind that death triggers are much worse. White-green. Best common trapped in the screen, 57.5. It's just a good removal. We talked about it. Hidden Gem, I selected Friendly Ghost yet again. 55.2, which is not impressive, but white-green has not impressive win rates. So yeah. Oh yeah, by the way, this is a good discussion. Someone in the chat says that Force Slot needs to be much more impactful than the Infernal Phantom. And I fully agree with that. And then we have Friendly Ghost. This is how an impactful 4-drop looks like. And that's why it has decent numbers in all the color combinations, taking into account that Selesnya is not great on its own. So yeah, Friendly Ghost is good in white-green. It is probably a good card to make sure that your survival triggers, because giving +2/+4 allows you to attack quite freely and having that creature tapped at the beginning of your second main phase. But I think it's generically a good card to put damage through. And I think that white-green should be doing just that. You just make a solid deck with solid creatures. Don't think about any survival synergies. You can put some survival cards, but don't focus on trying to get value out of them. Just focus on trying to get damage out of them. And I think that if people switch their mindset to that, they will have better results with Selesnya decks. And just to sort of make sure that I get this message across, I put Acrobatic Cheerleader as a trap for the archetype. Acrobatic Cheerleader, 2 mana, 2/2. It has survival. At the beginning of your second main phase, if Acrobatic Cheerleader is tapped, put a flying counter on it. This ability triggers only once. So one of the 2 commons with survival keyword in the set, 50.5% win rate in a deck that's supposed to be the survival deck. And this shows to me like white-green potentially can be a decent deck. I'm not saying great. I'm not saying good. I'm saying decent. But it's not going to be through survival synergy focus. Those things will be fine to happen, but you should be also fine for them not to happen. Problem that this deck will have, and that's very common, a problem for those type of decks, is that if the creature is good and it has survival, if it's generically good, people are going to put that card into their non-survival deck because it's generically good. And if it's not generically good, then you have to jump through hoops to get something that's decent, while other players are just playing their cards and they're just decent by the merit of existing. Habmab in chat says the survival mainly felt useful with hovership. And yeah, maybe there's something about it. I built a Convoke deck in my prayer list. It was a prayer list though, so keep that in mind. But I had Rip, and I had this room that gives all my creatures Convoke. I was casting a creature before my combat using Rip to tap for it. And from Rip, I was drawing more creatures. And I cast all of them except for one. Untapped everything, because that room also untaps things in the opponent's untap phase. And the next turn, the one creature I kept in my hand, I recast it with Rip, drew some more creatures, and it was a very nice engine. But this required 2 rares working together with each other. It was fine on the pre-release. It probably wouldn't have been great in the ladders of the cutthroat world of Mythic Arena or something. White-green best uncommons. Sheltered by the Ghost, 61.7%. That card is just outstanding. It's purely based on power level. The synergy gives its extra boost in Azorius, but it's great in any color combination. So just play it, pick it highly. And Fear of Abduction is the hidden gem I selected. 57.2% game in hand win rate, which is solid for a 6-drop. Fear of Abduction is a 6 mana 5/5 flyer. When it enters, as an additional cost to cast it, you exile a creature you control. You can exile something small, hopefully. And when it enters, you exile target creature an opponent controls. And when Fear of Abduction leaves the battlefield, you put both of those cards into owner's hand, not onto the battlefield. So at worst, even if it dies instantly, you made your opponent recast something. If you killed like a big token, well, you killed it. If you say Fractal, opponent has a 7/7 Fractal, you play this for 6 mana, you sacrifice like a menial 2-drop, and you kill the Fractal, and they will hopefully never get to 11 lands on the battlefield if you have a 5/5 flyer on board. So you as well killed the Fractal from Zimone, for example. And there are many other uses for that card. So it looks pretty solid as a top end for sort of like mid-range aggro kind of deck that I think Selesnya wants to be. Another example of how survival is not really hit the mark. Orphans of the Wheat is another trap I selected with 51% win rate. It's 2/1 human. Whenever it attacks, you can tap any number of creatures you control, and it gets +1/+1 for each of those creatures. So technically, you might have like 2 survival creatures. You tap both of them. You swing with Orphan of the Wheat, which is now a 4/3. So hopefully, opponent doesn't have good blocks against it, and then you get the 2 survival triggers. Reality is obviously that if an opponent knows that the orphans can attack and can generate value, they probably kill it instantly, or they leave out blockers to be able to block it favorably if you have to go for the attack just to get your survival triggers. White-black. Now that's technically a reanimator, but the best common it has is Unsettling Twins. The 4-mana 2/2 that makes another 2/2 in form of Manifest Dread. And I think that this card is on the plan with the reanimation strategy, but it's also on plan with just the strategy of playing good cards and beating opponent down with like higher number of creatures. But yeah, solid card, 60.3 win rate is really great when you think about the win rate of Orzhov is not particularly high. So yeah, kudos to Unsettling Twins for being great in decks. Also good to keep in mind, Manifesting Dread is sort of like giving you at least a chance to put one of your reanimation targets in the graveyard, so it's not completely just to make creatures. It also promotes your reanimation plan, that looking at the numbers of the reanimator spells is a valid plan. I mean, Emerge from the Cocoon and Live or Die or a bunch of those other reanimation spells have solid numbers in the white-black. Not great, but that's because the color pair is not that great. As a trap, I selected Acrobatic Cheerleader again, and just not a very defensive speed card. Most of its ability comes from, most of its upside comes from the fact that it wants to be attacking rather than surviving until you reanimate a large chunker. So there's problems with that card through that. But Fanatic of Harrowing, the 4-mana common that when it enters, each player discards a card, and if you discard a card this way, you draw a card, has a really high numbers in the white-black. It didn't have amazing numbers in any other black archetype. I don't think it had terrible numbers in like Golgari, but just not that great. Here, it's actively good, and I would suggest you playing the Fanatic of Harrowing. Good part of it is that you can discard a big reanimation threat on turn 4. You have the Fanatic to make you survive till turn 5. And on turn 5, that's the moment when you can reanimate your big thing that you discarded from the Fanatic. So yeah, it looks solid. And if you don't have a big threat, you can just cast it, discard something you don't need, and draw a new card. Hopefully it's something that you will be able to fill your gaps with. In terms of uncommons, the top uncommon for white-black is Splitskin Doll. And here I think that this card has particularly high opening hand win rate, which is not surprising. It's a 2-drop. But in white-black, drawing and discarding is probably better in many cases than just drawing a card straight. Because discarding this 7-drop on turn 3 or 2 opens up the plan of you reanimating it on turn 4. And Splitskin Doll ability to loot when you don't have another creature with power 2 or less gives you that opportunity very early. So you can roll it out as the first creature. Turn 2, I play my Splitskin Doll, I draw a card, discard my Valgavoth, and move on with my life until I get to 5 mana, in which I will deploy Valgavoth, and opponent will look at it, do some mental maths or pretend to do so, and scoop within the next 30 seconds. Hidden gem I selected is the Dashing Bloodsucker. And that's because it did surprise me quite a lot that this card was there. It's a 4 mana 2/5, so crab stat line basically. It has Eerie. It gets +2/+0 and lifelink until end of turn if you trigger Eerie. So if you play an enchantment, it becomes a 4/5 lifelinker on your turn or on the opponent's turn. And that card has really solid numbers. It's like bang in the middle of all the reanimation spells and reanimation enablers. Like a couple of them are just above the Dashing Bloodsucker, a couple of them are just below. But this data suggests at least that Dashing Bloodsucker is the kind of card that you want to be putting in your Orzhov decks. And Trap, I selected is Sporogenic Infection. The 2 mana aura, enchanted creature. When it enters, target player sacrifices a creature other than the enchanted creature. So you can play it on a small thing, they sacrifice the big thing. If they only have one thing, you play it on your creature, and they have to sacrifice their one thing because you can choose the player who will sacrifice. And the card is great in like black-red because it kills something and it leaves an aura that you can later sacrifice for something, or makes like a super big threat easier to kill. Because the damage will be on that. Problem with the card is that it doesn't universally do well, and white-black is one of those archetypes when it seems to be doing pretty badly. So stay out of the white-black. That doesn't mean that Sporogenic Infection is a bad card. It just doesn't seem to be working in Orzhov in most builds. And I'm sure that maybe one day you will find a build that you like, white-black auras or Eerie kind of deck. Let me know about it. But in the broad data that we have, where probably most people playing white-black were trying Reanimator, that card was not great. So think about it. Okay, we're almost there. Dimir, best common, is unable to scream at 56.7. But that's a very mediocre win rate. And generally, the commons in blue-black have pretty mediocre win rate. When you look at the white-black, Twins had 60%. Here, Unable to Scream has 56.7. You look at Selesnya, 57.5. So that's still higher than the 56.7. But in my hidden gem, and you might those of you who are very careful looking at the slide, we have a win rate of 59.5 with Glimmerlight yet again. So technically, the best common for Dimir is Glimmerlight. I say technically because the sample size is small, and that's why I didn't put it as the best common. I put it as a hidden gem because so few people play it that that probably it's not on the radar of many people to be putting that card into Dimir decks. And I'm honestly wondering, is there like some kind of an aggro build of Dimir? That's why the card is good, or is just the defensive speed of it, the short sword that you can put on your things, make them slightly bigger, and trade them off, is the reason why you will be playing Glimmerlight? And I still didn't figure it out, but I felt it's my duty to report the finding, at least. Do with it what you will. As I said, I'm not 100% sure why Glimmerlight would be great in the mirror decks, but it has like 3 percentage points higher win rate than top common in this color. And Trap, I selected this Baelmuck Leech. 2 mana 2/2 with Eerie. Each opponent loses 1 life whenever an enchantment enters or room is open. 50.3% win rate. Absolutely nothing impressive. And looking at how the numbers shape up, I can see the 4 forcing some sort of like aggro tempo version of the mirror in week 2. But we're still not there. So I'm just warning you. Also, very few people in the chat are at the level that the 4 can represent in Drafting Limited. I'm nothing bad about it. Very few people on the whole planet can figure out things that he does. So don't feel bad about it. But and I'm sure that he's going to meme with the Baelmuck Leech claiming that this is the best thing to be doing in this format in this truly hyperbolic way. But until then, know that the card has really bad stats in blue-black, which means probably that blue-black, maybe even if it wants to be doing Eerie, it maybe wants to do it in a slightly different way. But Dimir looks generally on the poorer side from all the archetypes. Just low win rates across the board, and I'm worried about the future of that particular archetype. Maybe we'll figure out how to build it optimal soon, but until then, it's going to be a problem child. There is a good reason why it's only drafted 5% of the time. Best uncommons in blue-black. Fear of Isolation came out on top, 60.4%. We talked about this card. As an additional cost, you return something to your hand. 2/3 flyer. Hidden Gem. I was shocked, honestly, because I was bad-mouthing that card in the Draft podcast just a couple of days ago when I was telling how much it sucks. Well, now I have to swallow my pride and tell you, actually, it has decent numbers in the mirror decks at 57.5. And I was pretty much shocked that it's that high. So this surprised me. Maybe it didn't surprise you, but I'm sure that among my listeners / viewers, there will be at least a couple of you that didn't expect that Duskmourn domination is half decent in the mirror decks. But here we are. Again, the mirror also has small sample sizes, so take the info with a pinch of salt. For the trap, what I selected is the Withering Torment. 2 and a black for an instant, destroy target creature or enchantment, you lose 2. Withering Torment looks like a great card. It looks like a B level card. But I went through every single color combination, and it's not great in all of them. Like, it was really good in the aggressive black color combinations, like I think that red-black is a sort of like aggressive version of a black deck. But in Dimir, this 2 life, I think, adds up. And that's why there's only like 51.6% win rate. It was also not like amazing in Orzhov decks, also not a super high win rate. So yeah, be careful. Withering Torment is not universally good a card. And even in the archetypes, when it's good to decent, it did not have like a mind-boggling win rate. So this is more like a replacement level card, like Murder, that sometimes is worse, but sometimes very rarely is actually better. So don't be bullish about this card. Think about how it fits with your game plan. I think that in Dimir, it's not particularly doing badly because Dimir does not have the tools to defend its life total early in the game in this format. So we'll frequently enter the late game with too low of a life total, and drawing Withering Torment when you're like at 3. Casting is sort of like, okay, I'm gonna gamble. I'm happy to lose that game. Let's go. Let's kill something and lose 2 life. But yeah, that's the problem. And we have the last one, the lagging one. Is it? And my feeling about it, many content creators' impressions about it, is that Blue-Red Rooms is a real deck, but people have not figured it out properly just yet. And hopefully this data will help you to understand it slightly better. Best common at 57.5, so again, nothing impressive. Glassworks / Shuttered Yard. Mainly Glasswork is the 3 mana deal 4 to a creature an opponent controls. And Shattered Yard is 5 mana. At the beginning of your end step, this room deals 1 damage to each opponent. And the pattern is Glasswork help you to be alive, then you are aiming at some kind of a big board stall, and then Shattered Yard is going to add to your clock by flipping it and then pinging opponent for 1 every turn. And across, maybe 3-4 turns, opponent should be dead. Hidden Gem I selected is a card that is generically good. It's in the top 3 red commons, but it just doesn't scream blue-red. I just showed this card because it's underplayed, has decent numbers, and this is supposed to be like, okay, I'm giving you a guideline on what potentially is good in blue-red. I'm not necessarily going to put it in every single copy of it. And yeah, Clockwork Percussionist, I don't know why is it good in blue-red. there is idea of defensive speed. You just play it and you chump block it. You save a bunch of life while getting more cards and digging into your best best room synergies. That's potentially one use of it. I don't think it wants to be aggressive, is it? So I don't think that Clockwork Percussionist is doing well in those decks because they are particularly aggressively leaning. So yeah, I think that's like a value creature for that deck. The trap I selected is Rampaging Soul Rager, 3 mana, 1/4, gets +3/+0 as long as there are 2 or more unlocked doors among rooms you control. It looks like it's an Izzet card. The problem is it's just not great. It's just a big dumb thing. 3 mana costing, which is fine. But on the other hand, that's probably the biggest thing that you have, and it's just not enough. And you don't have enough aggressive speed to utilize the fact that it's a 4/4. So yeah, there's a problem with it. Once you realize that this is not a great card, then you can start thinking about how are we going to build those Izzet decks. And I think that there are Izzet decks potential. We just need to figure out better, and not playing Rampaging Soul Rager is maybe step one in the right direction, to not play the bad versions of the Izzet decks. I mean, I did it on day one. I had like a couple of decks with a bunch of those Rampaging Soul Ragers, and they sucked. Best cards, best uncommon, Unnerving Grasp, the Mana War, still good. Almost every deck that has blue, this is the best uncommon. That should be a message to you. Pick that card highly. 60% win rate in Izzet, which is doing pretty bad, is impressive. Hidden Gem, card that is not played a lot in that deck, Irreverent Gremlin. And if I told you that the Clockwork Percussionist potentially is good because it will dig you to your good things, same thing applies for the Irreverent Gremlin. You just need to cast some creatures and dig to your rooms, and that's probably what you should be doing in the early game. And those things should also be able to trade with things and protect you from dying. Trap I selected is Ghostly Keybearer, because that's the 3/3 flyer that unlocks rooms that cost 4 mana. Only 52.6% win rate. Again, points you to the direction. Look, I'm not going to put bad creatures to try to gain some mana advantage with those decks. I should be getting my mana advantage elsewhere. I should be playing more impactful creatures. So yeah, not playing the Ghostly Keybearer is also one of the strategies that my voice is going. Well, luckily, this is the last slide. It's basically not the kind of a strategy that you want to be employing in those decks. We still will need to figure out, is it? I think it's there. I think that the signpost room, the Smoky Lounge Misty Saloon, it has like a 56.4% win rate in game in hand. Yeah, that's fine. The guy that sucks rooms is not a great card. That one has only like 53% game in hand win rate. So maybe that's the problem that someone in the chat had with drafting, is it? I think that the room that is the signpost, the one side is red and gives you mana, and the one side is blue and makes a flyer. That card is good. You can build around that one. And the one that sacrifices rooms is probably not what you want to be doing. And I think that this is the problem that Izzet ran, that they have two types of rooms. Some of them are aggressive, some of them are defensive. And like Rampaging Soul Rager is an aggressive creature. And I think that the aggressive version of rooms is just not good enough. So you need to be playing maybe more controlling defensive, playing the long game, controlling, bouncing your things, generating card advantage kind of thing, and not the I play a 4/4, I attack with the 4/4, and that's my whole plan. It's probably not good. And also, I'm going to do finicky, very delicate things with Ghostly Keybearer to get like 2 mana advantage for unlocking the room. Those two strategies and Izzet don't seem to be working. What looks interesting to me is more like I will prolong the game by playing a lot of interaction while casting some rooms, because some rooms are interaction in their own right. Once I stabilize, opponent is out of threat, I'm going to take over the game, make a bunch of like 9/9 flyers through my Misty Salon or whatever, and take over the game. I think that this is the sort of Izzet deck that you want to be looking at, and for that you need your unnerving grasps. For that you will need your what other good Izzet uncommons we have. Flatpits Drowner, the 2/1 vigilance, Fear of Isolation, the thing that bounces, Piggy Bank, like a good defensive creature that ramps your mana when it dies. I'm sure you're playing Piggy Bank defensive in those decks. Betrayer's Bargain, that's a good card for that. Bottomless Pool, the 1 mana unsummon kind of room. These are like decent cards for this deck. And at common, you get like the Glasswork, Scorching Dragonfire, Turn Inside Out as a sort of like a blocking trick that allows you to, put something onto the battlefield. Vanish from Sight, Unable to Scream, Glimmer Burst. All the cards that prolong the game and make it last longer, which makes me think Izzet is going to be a slow deck, and you need to build it as a deck that wants to survive to build. All right, and with that, I would like to thank 17Lands. I know how hard it is for them every single time the new set gets released. They need to figure out the logs. There's a lot of work behind the scenes. So thank you to all of the people involved. And I think I'm going to update my list of people next time, because there's so many more people working on 17Lands as volunteers and helping with the thing to run it. And also thanks to Fake Jig Brown, my helpful elf that helps me release it in the podcast form, which soon I heard is going to end. So unfortunately, Jake is fortunately for Jake, unfortunately for me, Jake is going to have a full-time job, which will not let him release this as a podcast. So if someone is there willing to give me some helping tips on how to upload podcasts better and how to quickly edit them, I would be very grateful. And yeah, with that, one more thank to my patrons who I finally mentioned after a month of neglecting them because of the guests, not because I neglect my patrons. I don't do that kind of thing. But hopefully next week we can figure out, using that information, a bit better how the format should be operating. And hopefully it was productive for you to listen to all that condensed information about what's good in the new set. And with that, I'll see you next week when we're going to go slightly deeper with the data.